Captain Catherine Morrison stood at the viewport of the UES Defiant, her eyes fixed on the shimmering rings of Saturn. The massive ice particles caught the distant sunlight, creating a natural light show that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Today, those same rings served as humanity's last strategic position against the incoming Xanthari fleet. Sensor update, Captain. Lieutenant Sarah Rodriguez called from her station. Long-range scans show 37 capital ships, each averaging 3 miles in length. Supporting craft numbers are still climbing past 200. Morrison nodded, her expression remaining neutral despite the growing knot in her stomach. The holographic display at the center of the bridge updated with the latest intelligence, showing the crystalline vessels of the Xanthari fleet. Their ships resembled elaborate glass sculptures more than traditional warships, each one a unique pattern of geometric shapes that somehow worked in perfect harmony. Engineering reports all systems at peak performance. Commander James Chen announced, his voice steady despite the tension. Though I still think the modifications to the sonic arrays were a risk we didn't need to take, noted Commander. Morrison's voice carried a hint of amusement. She'd heard the same concerns throughout her career. At Annapolis, during her controversial thesis defense, and at every command review. Too experimental, they said. Too willing to push beyond established doctrine. Those same critics had fallen silent after she'd saved 3 colony ships from raiders using nothing but carefully timed gravitational slingshots and a communications buoy reprogrammed to act as a makeshift weapon. The bridge crew worked with practiced efficiency, but Morrison could see the fear in their subtle movements, a slight tremor in their hands, the too frequent glances at the strategic display. They had good reason to be afraid. The Xanthari had swept through the outer system like an unstoppable force, their quantum weaponry turning Neptune's orbital platforms to dust, and the Jupiter Defense Fleet into expanding clouds of plasma. Message from Fleet Command. Communications Officer Lisa Park announced, they're ordering all remaining ships to fall back to Mars orbit. Morrison felt her crew's eyes on her. The Defiant was the most advanced destroyer in the human fleet, but it was still just one ship. Logic, training, and basic military doctrine all said the same thing. Fall back and regroup. Send our acknowledgement, Morrison said, a slight smile playing at the corner of her mouth. But inform command that we're experiencing some technical difficulties with our drive system. We'll need to delay our withdrawal for emergency repairs. The bridge grew silent. They all knew it was a transparent excuse, one that Fleet Command would see through immediately. But they also knew their captain. Ma'am, Commander Chen spoke up. The Xanthari will be in weapons range in 17 minutes. Even with our enhanced shields, we can't survive more than a few direct hits from their main batteries. Morrison turned to face her crew, her green eyes sharp with purpose. The Xanthari have never lost a naval engagement because everyone fights them the same way, head-on, force against force. But look at their ships. She gestured to the display. Those aren't just random patterns. There's mathematics there, physics we haven't fully understood yet. She walked to the center of the bridge, her hand passing through the holographic display of the enemy fleet. In all their centuries of warfare, they've never faced a human ship. They've never had to deal with someone who sees combat as a form of applied chaos theory. The crew straightened in their seats. They'd seen this side of their captain before. The tactician who turned scientific principles into victory against impossible odds. Today, we're going to teach the Xanthari something about human innovation, Morrison continued. And if we're very lucky, we might just save Earth in the process. Battle stations, everyone. Let's show them why they should have studied human history before starting this fight. The bridge erupted into activity, fear giving way to determined focus. As warning klaxons sounded throughout the ship, Morrison returned to her command chair. The enemy fleet drew closer, their crystalline hulls beginning to glow with building energy. One ship against 1,000. The odds were impossible. Morrison smiled. Impossible odds were exactly where humans excelled. Maintain course through the debris field, Morrison ordered, as the Defiant weaved through the scattered remains of Saturn's outer rings. Each chunk of ice and rock could provide crucial cover from the approaching Xanthari fleet, but something about their formation caught her eye. Lieutenant Rodriguez adjusted the sensor arrays, her fingers dancing across the holographic controls. "Captain, the enemy fleet is maintaining their standard attack pattern. First wave will be in firing range in 12 minutes. Morrison barely heard her. She was transfixed by the way light bent around the leading edge of the Xanthari formation. Their crystalline ships created strange distortions in space, like ripples in a pond. But these ripples seemed to interact with each other in ways that defied standard physics. "Lieutenant, switch the main display to quantum field analysis," Morrison said, her voice taking on the tone her crew recognized from previous Eureka moments. "Focus on the space between their ships." The holographic display shifted, and the bridge crew gasped. What had been nearly invisible to the naked eye now blazed with complex patterns of energy. Each Xanthari vessel left behind a trail of quantum distortions, creating an intricate web of light that connected their entire fleet. "It's like a symphony," Morrison whispered. Then louder, "Commander Chen, what's the resonant frequency of their hull material?" Chen consulted his data panels. "Based on previous encounters, their crystalline structure resonates at multiple frequencies, but our weapons can't generate enough power to." "Not our weapons," Morrison cut him off, her eyes still fixed on the display. "Look at the interference patterns. Every time their ships move in formation, they create standing waves in the quantum field. They're actually strengthening their own hull integrity through harmonic resonance." The science officer, Dr. Marcus Webb, moved to stand beside Morrison. "Captain, are you suggesting we could disrupt that resonance?" Morrison's smile grew wider. "Better. We're going to use it against them. Those patterns aren't random. They're following mathematical principles. The same principles that make a wine glass shatter when hit with the right frequency." She turned to the engineering station. "Commander Chen, those sonic arrays we modified, they're not just communication devices anymore, are they? They're wave generators." Understanding dawned on Chen's face. "The modifications we made, they could generate quantum interference patterns. But Captain, to affect their entire fleet, we'd need their own ships to amplify the effect," Morrison finished. "Like using the acoustics of a concert hall to multiply the sound of a single violin." The bridge crew watched as Morrison began programming a series of complex maneuvers into the tactical computer. The simulation showed the Defiant weaving through the enemy formation in what looked like a suicide run. "Each pass we make will add to the resonance," she explained. "Their ships are connected by these quantum fields. It's why their formations are so perfect, so unbreakable. But perfect symmetry has a weakness. Break it in just the right way, and the whole system collapses," Dr. Webb finished, his eyes wide with realization. Lieutenant Rodriguez spoke up from her station. "Captain, the Xanthari are accelerating. They've detected our presence." "Good," Morrison said, finalizing the last calculations. "That means they'll be charging their weapon systems. More energy in their grid means stronger resonance patterns for us to work with." She turned to address the entire bridge. "What we're about to attempt has never been done before. We're going to turn their entire fleet into a weapon against itself. Every shot they fire, every movement they make, will add to the harmonic cascade we're going to create." Commander Chen studied the calculations on his screen. "This is either brilliant or insane, Captain." "The best plans usually are both, Commander," Morrison replied. "Helm, take us in. Let's show these crystal ships what happens when they underestimate human physics. The Defiant's engines hummed to life as it began its approach. Ahead, the Zenthari fleet's crystal ships began to glow with building energy, unaware that their greatest strength was about to become their ultimate weakness. Morrison watched the distance counter tick down. Everything depended on perfect timing and precise execution. But then again, those were the conditions under which humans had always performed best. Incoming fire. Lieutenant Rodriguez's voice cut through the tense silence on the bridge. 3 quantum torpedoes streaked through space, their crystal cores pulsing with deadly energy. Morrison's orders came fast and precise. Helm, pattern Delta 7. Roll 45 degrees port and cut main power on my mark. She watched the approaching weapons, counting under her breath. Mark. The Defiant rolled gracefully, its engines going dark, just as the torpedoes reached their terminal guidance phase. The weapons, confused by the sudden loss of power signature, shot past harmlessly into the void. Power restored, Morrison commanded. Now, the real dance begins. Take us straight into their formation. The bridge crew exchanged nervous glances as the Defiant accelerated toward the wall of crystal ships. At this range, they could see the intricate patterns etched into the alien vessel's hulls, each one glowing with internal energy. They're targeting us with multiple weapon systems, Commander Chen reported, his hands flying over his console, reading energy builds in at least 20 capital ships. Morrison's voice remained steady. Maintain course. Lieutenant Park, begin broadcasting on the frequencies we calculated. Minimal power at first. We want them to think it's just background noise. The Defiant wove through the first line of Zenthari ships, coming so close that the crystal hulls filled their viewports. Morrison's planned route wasn't just evasive. Each turn, each acceleration, was precisely calculated to create specific patterns in the quantum wake. They're sending warning messages, Park announced. Their admiral demands our immediate surrender. Send them static, Morrison replied with a slight smile. But make it sound like we're trying to respond. I want them focused on communications. The ship shuddered as a glancing hit struck their aft shields. Morrison watched the energy readings spike on her display. Perfect. The Zenthari were using exactly the weapon frequencies she predicted. Hull stress increasing, Chen warned. These maneuvers are pushing our structural integrity to the limit. The ship can take it, Morrison assured him. She was built by humans, after all. Rodriguez, what's the status of the resonance pattern? The science officer consulted her readings. Building exactly as you predicted, Captain. The quantum wake from their ships is creating interference nodes at these coordinates. She highlighted several points on the tactical display. Morrison nodded in satisfaction. The Zenthari fleet was responding exactly as expected, tightening their formation to bring more weapons to bear. They didn't realize that each ship they moved into position added another layer to the resonance web she was weaving. They're launching fighters, Chen reported. 3 squadrons, moving to cut off our escape routes. Let them come, Morrison said. Their small ships will only add to the harmonic effect. Helm, begin Phase 2. Take us through the core of their formation. The Defiant banked hard, diving between 2 massive crystal battleships. Their weapon fire created beautiful patterns in space, but Morrison was watching something else. The way their energy discharges rippled through the quantum field. Sonic arrays at 70%, Park called out. Ready to begin primary sequence. Morrison held up her hand. Not yet. We need them angry first. Helm, let's show them some old Earth naval tactics. Cross their T, but do it in 3 dimensions. The next series of maneuvers would have made ancient sea captains proud. The Defiant sliced through the Zenthari formation again and again, each pass looking like a random escape attempt, but actually following a complex pattern. Captain, Rodriguez's voice held a note of awe. The resonance pattern. It's starting to self-perpetuate. Their own ships are amplifying the effect. Morrison allowed herself a moment of pride. The Xanthari, for all their advanced technology, had fallen into a trap as old as warfare itself. They'd assumed their enemy would play by the rules. All hands, she announced shipwide, prepare for Phase 3. The real battle is about to begin. The Defiant spun on its axis, facing the heart of the enemy fleet. Ahead of them, the space between the crystal ships shimmered with building energy, not from their weapons, but from the quantum web that would soon be their undoing. Deep in the Defiant's engineering section, warning lights flashed across every console as the ship's modified sonic arrays drew power far beyond their design specifications. Chief Engineer Maya Santos watched the energy readings with growing concern. Coolant pressure rising in arrays 3 through 7, she reported through the comm. We're pushing these systems way past red line, Captain. Morrison's voice came back calm and clear. Can you give me 5 more minutes at these levels, Chief? Santos glanced at the crystalline structure they'd installed to focus the sonic waves. A piece of salvaged Xanthari hull from an earlier battle. It was already vibrating at frequencies that made her teeth ache. 3 minutes guaranteed. After that, we risk a complete system failure. She paused. Or worse. 3 minutes will have to do, Morrison replied. Stand by for my signal. On the bridge, Morrison studied the complex pattern of energy waves now visible on the main display. The Xanthari fleet had fully encircled them, their crystal ships creating a sphere of seemingly impenetrable force. Final calculations complete, Dr. Webb announced from the science station. The resonant frequency of their hull material is actually a composite of 3 primary harmonics. If we hit all 3 simultaneously, their entire crystalline structure should shatter, Morrison finished. But we'll only get one shot at this. Lieutenant Park, begin broadcasting the carrier wave. A deep hum filled the ship as the sonic arrays powered up. It wasn't just sound. It was a carefully orchestrated pattern of quantum vibrations designed to interact with the natural resonance of the Xanthari ships. Enemy fleet is responding, Rodriguez reported. There, Captain, they're laughing at us. Their communications show they think we're trying to talk to them. Morrison smiled. Perfect. Commander Chen, begin Phase 1 of the sonic sequence. Let's show them this isn't a conversation. The hum changed pitch, becoming a complex chord that seemed to vibrate through reality itself. On the display, they could see the quantum wake patterns beginning to shift and align. Engineering to bridge. Santos' voice was tense. The focusing crystal is starting to show stress fractures. If it fails, the feedback could tear us apart. Reroute power through the secondary arrays, Morrison ordered. We need to maintain these exact frequencies for just a few more seconds. The Xanthari fleet finally seemed to realize something was wrong. Their ships began to move, attempting to break the perfect formation they'd been tricked into creating. They're too late, Webb said with quiet satisfaction. The resonance pattern is self-sustaining now. Their own ships are acting as amplifiers. Morrison stood from her command chair, moving to stand before the main viewport. The space around them had become a symphony of light and energy, with visible waves rippling between the crystal ships. All hands, she broadcast shipwide. Secure for impact and brace for Phase 2. What we're about to do has never been attempted in the history of space combat. Either we're about to win this war, or we're about to learn a very expensive lesson in physics. She turned to Park. Begin final sequence. All arrays, maximum power. Focus everything on the flagship. The hum became a roar as the Defiant poured every ounce of available power into its sonic arrays. The focusing crystal in engineering blazed with internal light, its structure holding together through nothing but human engineering and sheer determination. Quantum field alignment at 98%, Webb called out. Resonance wave building. Crystal structure of target ship beginning to respond. Through the viewport, they could see the nearest Xanthari ships beginning to vibrate, their perfect crystalline forms shimmering, as though viewed through heat waves. "This is it," Morrison said softly. "Chief Santos, give us everything you've got. Let's turn their symphony into a requiem." The Defiant's engines screamed as they pushed to maximum power, the modified sonic arrays generating frequencies that could shatter mountains. Around them, the quantum field itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the final note in humanity's desperate concert. Time seemed to slow as the Defiant sonic arrays reached full power. The Xanthari flagship, a massive crystal structure that dwarfed every other ship in the fleet, began to emit a high-pitched whine that even the vacuum of space couldn't completely silence. "Energy readings off the scale," Rodriguez called out, her voice nearly lost in the ship-wide vibration. "The flagship's crystal matrix is beginning to..." She never finished the sentence. The Xanthari flagship suddenly blazed with internal light, its crystalline structure refracting the energy in 1,000 different directions. For a brief moment, it looked like a star made of diamond. Then it shattered. The destruction wasn't like a normal ship's explosion. It was beautiful, almost artistic. Billions of crystal shards caught the light of Saturn's rings, creating a rainbow-colored cloud that expanded outward in a perfect sphere. Direct hit on their command structure. Chen shouted over the noise of their own straining systems. "But Captain, the resonance pattern, it's not stopping." Morrison gripped her command chair as the Defiant shuddered. "It's not supposed to stop. Watch." The cloud of crystal fragments from the destroyed flagship created its own resonance pattern, multiplying the effect of their sonic weapons. Each shard acted like a tiny mirror, reflecting and amplifying the harmonic frequencies. "Secondary detonations beginning," Webb reported, his scientific detachment giving way to awe. "The crystal fragments are acting as resonance transmitters. The effect is spreading through their entire formation." On the main display, they watched as ship after ship began to show signs of stress. The perfectly organized Xanthari fleet was dissolving into chaos as their commanders realized too late what was happening. "They're trying to break formation," Rodriguez said, monitoring the enemy's desperate maneuvers. "But their own defense protocols are working against them. Their ships are programmed to maintain optimal combat spacing." Morrison allowed herself a grim smile. "And that spacing is exactly what's killing them. Every ship that breaks apart adds to the resonance field. Their perfect formation has become a perfect chain reaction." Through the viewport, they watched as a second capital ship succumbed to the harmonic cascade. Its destruction was even more spectacular than the flagships, the larger crystal sections creating new focal points for the sonic energy. "Engineering to bridge." Santos' voice was urgent. "The focusing crystal is about to fail. We need to power down the arrays." "Not yet," Morrison ordered, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. "We need to maintain the field for just a few more seconds. Divert all non-essential power to structural integrity." The Defiant's hull groaned under the strain of its own weapons. Warning lights flashed across every station as the ship's systems were pushed to their absolute limits. "Third wave of detonations beginning," Webb announced, his voice filled with wonder. "The resonance pattern has become self-sustaining. Captain, I think we've actually done it." The space around them had become a kaleidoscope of destruction. Dozens of Xanthari ships were now caught in the cascade effect, their beautiful crystal forms breaking apart in synchronized waves of rainbow-colored chaos. "Message from the enemy fleet," Park called out. They're asking how we did it. Their remaining ships are requesting terms of surrender." Morrison finally gave the order everyone had been waiting for. "Power down the sonic arrays. Begin emergency cooling procedures." She turned to her crew, pride evident in her expression. "Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we just rewrote the book on space combat." As the sonic arrays wound down, the bridge crew watched in stunned silence as the results of their gamble played out before them. The once mighty Xanthari fleet had been reduced to a cloud of glittering crystal fragments, each piece catching and reflecting the light of Saturn's rings. "Damage report," Morrison called out, already planning their next move. "Hull integrity at 60%, Chen responded. "The focusing crystal is a total loss, and we've burned out most of our power relays. But we're alive." Morrison nodded, looking out at the field of crystalline debris that had once been an invincible alien fleet. "We're more than alive, Commander. We just proved why humans never fight fair. We fight smart." The victory celebration on the Defiance Bridge lasted exactly 3 seconds before reality reasserted itself with brutal force. A massive shockwave from the latest crystal ship detonation slammed into their port side, sending crew members sprawling. Multiple hull breaches on decks 3 through 5. Chen's voice cut through the chaos. "Emergency force fields holding, but our structural integrity field is failing." Morrison was already moving, her fingers flying across the tactical display. "The chain reaction is building faster than we predicted. Those crystal fragments aren't just reflecting the resonance, they're amplifying it." Through the viewport, space had become a lethal light show. The destruction of each Xanthari vessel released new waves of energized crystal shards, creating an expanding web of destructive harmonics that threatened everything in its path, including the Defiant. "Engineering to bridge." Santo's voice was almost lost in static. "The power surge from that last hit fried our main distribution node. We're running on emergency systems only. Reroute everything through the auxiliary circuits," Morrison ordered. "Rodriguez, give me a crisis path through this debris field. We need to thread the needle here." The science officer's hands moved with desperate speed across her console. "Calculating now, but Captain, the crystal fragments are creating new resonance patterns faster than our computers can track them. Any course I plot will be obsolete in seconds." Morrison stood before the main display, watching as the destruction spread through the enemy fleet like a crystal wildfire. Each explosion added new variables to an already complex equation. But in that chaos, she saw something beautiful. "Look at the pattern," she said, her voice filled with sudden understanding. "The fragments aren't moving randomly. They're following the same mathematical principles as the original ships. Lieutenant Park, can you still access the sonic array controls?" "Yes, ma'am, but we're limited to less than 10% power." "That's all we need. Program this frequency sequence." Morrison's fingers danced across her console, inputting a series of numbers. "We're going to use their own resonance pattern as a shield." Chen looked up from his station, understanding dawning on his face. "Like using sound waves to cancel out other sound waves." "Exactly. If we can match the harmonic frequency of the debris field." Morrison was cut off as another explosion rocked the ship. 2 more Xanthari capital ships just went critical. Rodriguez called out, "The chain reaction is accelerating. We've got multiple debris clouds converging on our position." Morrison's voice remained steady. "Helm, full power to engines. Take us directly into the largest debris cloud." The bridge crew froze for a split second, then sprang into action. They'd learned to trust their captain's seemingly insane plans. "Broadcasting counter-harmonic frequencies now," Park announced. "Crystal fragments are beginning to respond." The Defiant plunged into the heart of the destruction, its weakened sonic arrays creating a bubble of stable space around the ship. Outside their protected zone, the chain reaction continued to spread, but the crystal shards near the ship began to move in concert with their broadcast frequency. "It's working," Webb exclaimed. "The fragments are actually forming a navigable channel through the debris field." Morrison allowed herself a small smile. Sometimes the best way to survive a storm is to become part of it. "Helm, follow that channel." Engineering, give us everything you've got. The Defiant threaded its way through the crystalline apocalypse, riding the very forces that had destroyed the enemy fleet. Around them, the remaining Zenthari ships continued to shatter, adding their own energy to the massive chain reaction. Message from Fleet Command. Park called out over the ship-wide vibration. They're ordering all surviving ships to clear the sector. They're reading critical energy levels throughout the entire battle zone. Acknowledge the order, Morrison replied, her eyes fixed on the disintegrating enemy fleet. But tell them we'll be the last one out. We started this dance. We're going to finish it. The Defiant continued its desperate journey through the heart of the storm, surfing the wave of destruction they'd created. Behind them, the greatest fleet in known space was being transformed into the most beautiful graveyard the galaxy had ever seen. Warning klaxons blared through the Defiant's corridors as emergency teams raced to contain multiple hull breaches. The ship's once pristine interior now resembled a war zone, with sparking conduits and the acrid smell of burned electronics filling the air. Port shield generator just failed. Chen's voice was hoarse from shouting over the constant barrage of alerts. Starboard generator at 12% and falling. Morrison studied the tactical display, where thousands of crystal fragments now filled space like a deadly snowstorm. Each piece was a potential weapon, charged with the same resonant energy that had destroyed their parent ships. Engineering report, she called out, already knowing the answer wouldn't be good. Santo's voice crackled through the static-filled comm. Main power core is redlining. We've lost 3 secondary systems, and the hull stress is approaching critical levels. Captain, we need to get out of here. A massive crystal shard, nearly the size of a shuttle, spun past the bridge viewport. Its surface rippled with energy patterns that matched the Defiant's own failing shields. Not yet, Morrison replied, her eyes following the movement of the debris. Look at the pattern. The larger fragments are creating safe zones in their wake. Rodriguez, can you track those zones? The science officer's fingers flew across her console. Barely. The energy fields are shifting faster than our sensors can process, but there's definitely a mathematical progression to their movement. Like the eye of a hurricane, Morrison mused. Each major piece of debris creates a calm spot behind it. If we time this right. Another impact rocked the ship, this one hard enough to crack the main viewport's outer layer. Emergency sealants immediately deployed. But the message was clear. They were running out of time. Hull integrity down to 28%. Chen called out. We're losing structural cohesion on the port nacelle. Morrison made her decision. All power to forward shields. Helm, plot, and intercept course with that large fragment at bearing 340 Mark II. Captain. The helm officer's voice wavered. That'll take us deeper into the debris field. Trust me. Morrison's voice held the same calm confidence that had gotten them this far. That crystal piece is moving against the main flow. It'll create a wake we can follow. The Defiant's engines screamed as they pushed through the storm of crystalline shrapnel. Smaller fragments bounced off their failing shields, each impact sending shudders through the ship's frame. Power core temperature critical. Santo's warning came through broken static. We're losing containment. Reroute emergency power through the auxiliary systems, Morrison ordered, and stand by for my signal. When I give the word, I need everything we've got left. The massive crystal shard loomed before them, its surface a web of crackling energy. As they drew closer, the tactical display confirmed Morrison's theory. The space behind it was relatively clear, protected by the same forces that were tearing apart the rest of the sector. Impact in 5 seconds, Rodriguez called out. 4, 3. All hands, brace for maneuver. Morrison's voice rang through the ship. This is going to get rough. The Defiant rolled hard to port, aligning itself with the crystal's wake, just as their shields finally failed. For one terrifying moment, they were completely exposed to the storm of energized fragments. Then they were through, slipping into the calm zone behind the massive shard, like a surfer catching the perfect wave. It worked. Webb's scientific detachment broke into open amazement. The fragment's energy field is actually protecting us from the secondary reactions. Morrison allowed herself a brief smile. Now comes the hard part. We need to stay in this sweet spot until we clear the debris field. Helm, match course, and speed exactly. Engineer, give us whatever power you can spare for maneuvering thrusters. The Defiant limped through space, sheltering behind their impromptu shield as the destruction they'd unleashed continued to spread through the remains of the Zenthari fleet. They'd won their battle, but survival was still far from certain. 3 weeks later, the Defiant drifted in high Earth orbit, its battle-scared hull reflecting the planet's blue glow. Repair crews swarmed around the ship like busy insects, patching the countless holes and scars from their historic battle. Captain Morrison stood in the observation lounge, looking out at the massive crystal fragment they'd used as their shield. Earth scientists had insisted on preserving it, both as a monument and as a subject for study. Now it rotated slowly in space, still crackling with residual energy from the battle. The final casualty reports are in, Commander Chen said, joining her at the window. 17 injured, but no fatalities. Engineering says it'll take 6 months to get the ship back to full combat status. Morrison nodded, her eyes fixed on the crystalline monument. And the Zenthari fleet. Complete destruction of 87% of their forces. The remaining ships surrendered and retreated beyond Pluto's orbit. He paused. Intelligence reports they're already calling it the Rainbow Massacre in their communications. I prefer the Glass Garden, Lieutenant Rodriguez added as she entered, carrying a data tablet. That's what the astronomy teams are calling it. The debris field has settled into a stable orbit around Saturn. It's visible from Earth now. The newest ring in the solar system. Morrison finally turned from the window. Have they figured out why it worked? Why the Zenthari never saw this weakness in their own ships? Dr. Webb's analysis just came in. Rodriguez handed over the tablet. It was their perfection that defeated them. Their ships were too precisely engineered. Too mathematically perfect. They never considered that perfection could be a weakness. But humans did, Chen added with a hint of pride. Because we're the species that looks for flaws in everything, even perfection itself. A junior officer entered the lounge, looking slightly nervous. Captain, the Joint Chiefs are ready for your debriefing. And there's a Zenthari diplomatic vessel requesting permission to approach Earth. They're asking to speak with the Soundweaver. Morrison raised an eyebrow. Soundweaver. That's what they're calling you, Rodriguez explained. In their language, it's a term of respect for someone who shapes reality through harmony. They want to learn from us, Captain. Your victory didn't just save Earth. It changed how they see humanity. Speaking of learning, Chen interjected, Fleet Command has ordered all ships to be equipped with modified sonic arrays. They're calling it the Morrison Protocol. The captain shook her head, suppressing a smile. The Zenthari will adapt. They'll find ways to shield their ships against resonance weapons. Of course they will, Rodriguez agreed. But that's not the real lesson here. We showed them something they'd never considered. That their greatest strength could be turned against them. They'll never look at combat the same way again. Morrison picked up a small crystal shard from her desk. A piece of the fragment that had saved them. It caught the light from Earth, sending rainbow patterns dancing across the lounge walls. You know what the real victory was? She asked, turning the crystal in her hand. We didn't just survive. We changed the rules of space combat forever. The next time someone builds an invincible fleet, they'll have to ask themselves, what would the humans see that we're missing? The junior officer cleared his throat. "Captain, the Joint Chiefs are waiting." Morrison set the crystal back on her desk. "Tell them I'm on my way. And send word to the Zenthari diplomatic vessel. They're cleared to approach. It's time we taught them about the human art of finding beauty in imperfection." As she left the lounge, Morrison took one last look at the massive crystal monument outside. In the right light, with Earth's glow behind it, the fragment looked like a diamond set in azure. Beautiful, perfect, and yet ultimately flawed, just like the assumptions that had led to its creation. The Defiant would be repaired. The Zenthari would return, not as conquerors, but as students, and humanity had added another chapter to its long history of achieving the impossible through nothing more than curiosity, creativity, and the courage to question everything, even perfection itself.